Welcome to All Nature Connected, a podcast created by the Forest Bathing Institute where we explore all nature connected topics, including nature and health, nature inspired lifestyle, nature connection and forest bathing, nature preservation, and eco awareness. We hope that this podcast will inspire you to become more connected with nature and your own health and well-being.
Hello everyone, this is Olga from the Forest Bathing Institute. Today, All Nature Connected podcast. Today we have a very special guest with us, Sara Russell. And Sara Russell is a satisfaction coach and the host of Mudwater Trends with Benefits podcast, who lives on Amahmutsan Tribal Band land in Santa Cruz, California. And today we will be talking about well-being and nature with Sara. Sara, hello, very happy to have you here today.
I'm so glad to be here and talking with you again.
And I already told Sara, when I read the bio, I just thought, oh my God, there are so many things that could be helpful for us to understand and learn about. So we'll just try to get step by step to know a few things about you. So could you please start with explaining a bit more about what it means to be a satisfaction coach? Because I don't think I've ever heard about this here in the UK.
Sure. So my coaching comes from a radical lineage. It started in the late 60s, early 70s in Berkeley, and it was created by this group of radical psychiatrists. So people who were prescribing medication to people who had this question about how much is it the biochemistry in somebody's body that's making them have the experiences that they're having, and how much is it the external environment that's affecting them, impacting them in some way. So how much are their bodies actually having very reasonable responses to very unreasonable environments? And so they came up with this whole system for how to create change, recognizing that we can't change just as individuals, that there has to be some larger ecosystem that we're changing within. And so when I talk about being a satisfaction coach, I'm starting with the premise that people are good-hearted and well-intentioned, which is already a little bit radical. Some people are going to push back against that and go, some people aren't doing their best, and some people are doing a lot of harm in the world. And they are. That's absolutely true. But most people aren't walking around going, how can I be the worst version of myself and make all the most terrible choices I can? The reason people are doing that is because of some kind of scarcity, some kind of danger, some kind of competition. There's something that's going on. And so what I'm really trying to do is find how people can have a fully expressed human heart, how they can be the most full expression of their precious vessels, whatever that means, recognizing that asking people to do that within this larger context of capitalism or white supremacy or these big systems that oppress people can make that really challenging. And so I'm trying to help people be like in their muchness, while at the same time recognizing that there are these huge systemic forces that are like counteracting that. And so what would be a satisfying life? Because so many of us are trying to reach our maximum potential. And I think maximum potential can become this never-ending quest for more versus what would actually be enough in this moment.
This is so valuable, and I think satisfaction, same as balance. Sometimes we want too much of one thing, too much of good. We don't want too much of bad, but actually, we look holistically, everything is good and bad. It's all intertwined, and we wouldn't have too much good if we didn't have the bad, really. We wouldn't have to compare. And just looking at an individual as an individual with their needs, but within a bigger system, it feels to me a lot like parallel between how we look in forest bathing at a tree and the community. There is a tree with its own needs, and then there is a community of trees, a forest, but we still live in harmony. It still manages to survive. And I think it's such a beautiful concept. So I'm actually very interested how you came to this, because it's a very unusual concept. At least I haven't come across it, and it feels to me like quite an intuitive concept that you don't actually read too much about. It's not that there is probably no set of specific rules for that.
I love what you just said about it being akin to forest bathing, because one of my Qigong teachers, Roger Yonke, actually said that human beings are very much like trees, where it looks like the trees are all separate. It looks like we're all separate human beings, but underneath the surface where you can't see is this entire root system that's connecting all of us together. So I very much, like, you and I are in a very similar kind of field energetic wise, where yes, it looks like there's this individual, but actually there's a whole network underneath. And yeah, the thing is, what I'm coaching, I call myself a satisfaction coach, but it comes from the lineage of skills for change. And skills for change, it's because it's radical, it hasn't ever hit the mainstream in a big way because it's an effort-based intervention. It's not effortless. A lot of what we're doing is actually super counterintuitive, where we're going, you have to go against what status quo is asking you to do. You have to be willing to listen to your nervous system and rewire it to respond in a new way. You have to not believe every toxic thought that's going through your head. And so we're overriding some very primal biological urges in the work that I do with people. But because it's not fast, this is like slow change, low harm. It takes a long time. Although my teacher, Nancy Shanto, likes to talk about it takes a long time, but it's the shortest path to change that we found so far that's sustainable. But because it takes a long time and because it's high effort, people need time, they need energy, they need resources in order to be able to truly delve into creating lives of satisfaction. If you're dealing with scarcity in any of those ways constantly, it's going to be really hard to make huge systemic change.
And I think that's what you brilliantly said. It's the shortest, it's the maybe not the shortest way, but it's the fastest way we have so far, because I think that's where, even working with ecology and nature preservation, many people don't understand that actually sometimes, and actually most of the times, they have to change themselves and do things that are uncomfortable, break the patterns, break the go-go-getter mentality, and actually work with themselves to change the whole ecosystem. But it starts from within, and how uncomfortable it might be. It might take a few years or decades. We're not saying, and I think that's where as an institute will stand out, we're not saying there are no quick decisions, because decisions or solutions, because we have to change the system from within. Yet it is the shortest path to having a solution as we know it. So it's such an interesting parallel, even working in, you know, a bit of different fields yet still connected. We're a bit like a forest here, and it's just amazing. I think the philosophy that you have, it really resonates, and I'm really excited to hear more about it, and also hear more about how you live on the tribal band land, because I think I have not met a person who lives on a tribal band land yet. So I wanted to ask you if you were born there or you moved there. What's the story behind, and how does it feel to live there?
Sure. So just for clarity's sake, I'm not on a reservation. So that's not actually what's happening here. But there has become this trend. I don't know how far in the world it's spreading right now, but some kind of land acknowledgement. And so recognizing that the land I'm on, I don't own that land, that this land has been colonized in some way. And so really recognizing that not only was this indigenous land, but this continues to be indigenous land. There are still indigenous caretakers, stewards for this land. And in Santa Cruz, California, the people who are stewarding this land are the Amahmutsan Tribal Band. And this is also a Wawa-speaking Yupi, like unceded land here as well. And so recognizing through the land acknowledgement that Santa Cruz is a particularly privileged place. We have redwoods, we have mountains, we have ocean. It's fairly affluent here. And so recognizing that all of that privilege did come at a cost to somebody at some point. And so is land acknowledgement enough? No, it's not. Do I also feel like I need to pay the equivalent of what rent is? Yes, I do. And so I think that's something important for people to consider as well. Are you actually paying rent for the land you're on? And again, I'm talking to you, a forest bather. And so there's this idea of who owns land, and these borders and these boundaries that we put up. Like how realistic is that to say this piece of land is mine? And I think, you know, within a particular fluency, there's this idea of I want to own my own home and I want to own the land that's underneath my home. But can anybody ever actually really do that? And because there's a housing crisis going on here in the United States and other places in the world, and people are having to pay rent to landlords that are profiting from that, all of that's very complicated. And we're all just renting space anyway. And so can we make that more transparent? So part of the land acknowledgement, when I say I'm on Amahmutsan Tribal Band land, is recognizing I don't own this land. And there are people that are taking care of this land. And how can I actually take care of those people who are taking care of this land so that I'm being responsible within the ecosystem that I'm in?
That's just so beautiful, Sarah. It just struck a thing in me because I think here living in the UK, we don't have such a concept, unfortunately. And all the land is divided and there are owners of the land everywhere. But really the problem is that, yes, people take care of their land in a way that they seem most fit, but no one really takes care of the land in a way that they're thinking of the whole planet. They're not taking care of the land as for the planet's sake, more like it's my piece and I'm gonna do with it what I want within the, within the limits. I'm gonna make use of it. And this idea of borrowing the land, and that you said you are living on this piece of land that you are renting out effectively, even if you have a house there, it's just so beautiful. And I think that's where many people's mentality doesn't quite go, is the connection with the earth. Even though we might be knowing all the facts, we might be knowing the science, the benefits of nature, if we don't understand that it is a privilege to be here, and every day we are living here, we're taking from the earth, and we are part of the earth, and the earth is this big home that we are on, and honoring that home, like you would take care of your bedroom, you would take care of your house, you would take care of your land, taking care of the whole planet, knowing what's good for the whole planet, and connecting it with other communities. It's so important. So I love, that's why I'm so interested in your work with communities. That's one thing that you also mentioned. So could you talk a little bit about your work with communities?
Sure. So one of the most recent community offerings that I did is we do a drag story time here in Santa Cruz where drag queens will read stories to children. And clearly that's a political act in this current climate right now. So there are people that are strongly opposed to drag queens reading stories to children. And somebody wrote in a letter to the editor of one of our local free newspapers and was disparaging the fact that Santa Cruz has this as an offering. And I've been an activist at multiple points in my life, and I'm surrounded by people who are deeply committed to collective liberation, and everyone wanted to move into action right away. They wanted to write a response. They wanted to stage protest. They like all of this, like you were talking about earlier, the go, go, go. And what I realized through the help of my teachers in that moment was what my community actually needed was a pause to actually sit with our grief around the fact that we had hatred swirling around our community, that we had oppression swirling around our community. And actually what we needed to do before we moved into action was pause and feel our grief over the fact that we were going through this. And so one of the offerings that I created with a friend of mine was a grief circle where people could come in, we would do some kind of centering practice. There were rituals that I created for people to express their grief, possibly release their grief, but at least be in community with their grief. Because again, back to that idea that we're trees and we're all connected by this root system, grief is one of those things that we tend to make very private, that we think we're supposed to do behind closed doors. And then we wipe our tears away, we make sure our eyes aren't puffy, and then we go out into the world so that nobody actually knows that we were experiencing this deep sadness. And so creating a space that contextualized, we grieve. And it's actually more powerful sometimes when we grieve together in community so that we can actually see we're not alone in holding this. There are other people holding this with us. So that was one of the offerings that I created recently. And, within Skills for Change, there's the coaching, there's figuring out how depleted you are, what do you need in order to replenish yourself? What kind of resourcing and support do you need? And so all of that was available, but I also offer body work. There's a somatic component to all of that. And so if people needed to lay down and have the cranium of their head held, if people needed their feet held in some way, if somebody just needed to come and sit and like lean back to back with somebody. So bringing grief back to the body as well, and not just like a conversation we were having about our grief, but also being able to embody our grief and have that be okay.
Wow, it amazes me every time I talk to you, Sara, the synchronicity, because you were talking, and I think that's a brilliant idea, creating this grief circle for your community, because grief, as you said, is such a feeling that I think across the world, it's kind of a shameful feeling. We try to not show our weaker side. Vulnerability is supposed to be something that everyone is a bit ashamed of, and it's a pity. And I think things need to change on this level of acceptance as well of things. And today I talked to one of the editors about nature connection and the problem of people connecting with nature, with the planet, and why the change is not happening, at least here in the UK, as we're waiting for more things to happen and they're not. And what she was saying, and she's practicing mindfulness, she goes to regular yoga classes, what she was saying, which I think was a very frank response, but it made me think that it's just too painful. It's just too painful to look there. And I don't want to, and we don't want to. No one wants to look there. But the first step to change is to actually recognize there is a problem, to have pain, to have grief. Yes, we've lost so much. I mean, look in your country, Maui, Hawaii, it's just heartbreaking what's happening. It shouldn't be happening. We could have done something about it years ago, and still we're closing our eyes just because we can't grieve. We can't be with that pain. And I think it's so important to start that healing with ourselves, start accepting ourselves, start accepting what's around us. And with compassion as a community, I don't think we can do it individually, as community working together to find a solution, but starting to look at things as they are, as painful as they are. So I'm very actually interested how you made this community appear, and you know what response you have as participants of this community.
So it's really interesting because I've noticed this with a lot of my offerings, that the first time I offer something, people are very quietly, like kind of side eye parallel play interested in it. Like, what's happening over there? And then having a grief circle one time isn't going to do it, because as so many of the other offerings that I put out into the world, people go, oh, I'm kind of interested in that, but change takes time. And somebody making time in their schedule, checking in with their bodies. Do I feel safe enough to go into that space? How established is that space? And so recognizing with the grief circle, there was interest. Is it as big as I wanted it to be? As big as I would like the community to be responding? No, but again, like what's my satiation point for that? I'm not sure how big it would need to get before I felt satisfied that enough people were grieving in community with each other. And so recognizing, particularly with the grief circle, oh, this is something that needs to happen consistently. People actually need to know that we're going to be here, that this space is going to be available to them. Because if I'm asking somebody, you know, what you were talking about, particularly with Maui, struck a chord with me, because people were perishing. The land has been destroyed. And there were tourists getting in the water within days of the devastation happening. And it's really easy to villainize the tourists that were showing up and go, how could you be so heartless? How could you be so cruel? And instead of you're bad, you're wrong, how could you, going, wow, what level of numb are most people experiencing that they couldn't actually let in what was in that moment, and instead were dissociating, or, you know, it was a certain amount of privilege that was making them not see what was going on. But so like with the grief circle, asking people to carve through that numb layer that most of us are experiencing for a one-time event that's happening for a couple hours, I'm going, do you trust me enough in a 3-hour offering to remove all of the numbness? Because once you get through that numbness, we know what's underneath that. It's a tremendous amount of pain. It's a tremendous amount of grief. There might be rage and resentment, and there's going to be pain of some kind. And so recognizing when I'm making an offering to the community, I can't just dip in and dip out and go, okay, well, I sprinkled some fairy dust and now it's all better, kind of bypassing. but recognizing, oh, I need to keep going. I'll be here. I'll be here. We'll do this again. And if you get through that numb layer, you can talk to me about that. You're not just going to have to go and deal with like getting through the numb layer on your own. You know, I think that happens in so many healing environments. Again, I'm not saying this to persecute people, but people come in for a week-long retreat or a workshop, and then they're sent home. They've been completely dysregulated. All that numbness has been removed. And now they're on their own. And there's all kinds of heartbreak that happens and collapse that happens because the container actually needs to extend much longer, much bigger than what a lot of offerings give.
So I'm actually curious, for someone who's listening to us, and we have, I think, lots of listeners who might be very open to what you're saying and maybe even ready to let this grief come up. What could be the safest steps for them to start actually unveiling it and coming in contact with it? And then, as you said, having that safety container, if they might not have those grief groups where they are.
Sure. So micro interventions are going to be really helpful with that question. I love that question, by the way, like giving people a safe place to start or a small place to start, even if it's uncomfortable. The first step is always awareness, right? Becoming aware of what's actually going on for you. And so often where I'll start is, what is my response to whatever the activation I'm experiencing is? And we've got the survival responses. Most people are familiar with fight, flight, freeze. We also know about fawn, which is more of this toward, tend, and befriend. And there's also dissociate, where I'm a high functioning dissociative. It's really easy for me to really detach from what my body's doing, which means I'm a great person to have around in a crisis because I'm not actually feeling much of what's happening in the moment. So it's super high functioning for me. And not demonizing whatever our survival response is, recognizing that at some point, little us felt like our survival response kept us safe. We're still here. And so going, oh, I'm fighting right now. Oh, I'm in a freeze right now. I feel like I can't move. Oh, I'm in flight. I feel like I can't even be in this conversation. I have to excuse myself to go hide in the bathroom right now. Oh, I'm fawning. I'm starting to clean up the house and do the dishes. Oh, I'm dissociating. I don't even know what I'm feeling in this moment. My vision's gotten blurry. My hearing's gotten dull in some way. And not actually trying to fix the survival response. Going, oh, this is how I respond. And just sitting with the what is, this is where I'm located in my body. These are the sensations that I'm experiencing. These are the emotions that are coming up for me. These are the thought patterns I tend to be experiencing. And just being with what is brings the observer consciousness online, which creates a little bit more breathing room in the container. And that little bit more breathing room opens up a pocket of choice. And then if we keep building our awareness, that space keeps increasing, which creates more and more choice, where eventually we can respond with attuned attention to whatever it is we're experiencing. Oh, I have a fight response. Maybe I need to, by myself, so I'm not scaring anybody, remove myself and go punch a pillow or yell in my car. Oh, I'm having a flight response. Maybe I need to go run around the block 3 times. Oh, I'm having a freeze response. Maybe I need to wrap myself up in a weighted blanket and just like hold my breath and be as still as possible for a while. So rather than shaming whatever our response is, you know, you and I care about the fact that the planet is burning right now. And like, is one body enough body to hold all of the grief over what's happening with the planet right now? Of course not. But if we can turn towards ourselves just a little bit and be like, I am sad, deeply sad about this. What do I need in my sadness if I can't create change overnight? If I don't even think I'm going to be able to create change within my generation, it's going to be 7 generations from now that maybe any of this is going to change in a significant way. You know, like, what are our grandchildren's grandchildren going to be experiencing? That doesn't mean we can't turn towards ourselves in these small ways that then actually gives us the energy we need for the bigger change we want to see in the world.
This is just, I have goosebumps when you talk, Sara, and that just something that I wish I could have read a book on, you know, years and years ago when I was feeling anxious and unsure, and I didn't really know how to cope with it. And there were nothing could tell me how I was feeling and what I need to do, and that is normal. And I think so many people these days, we just not very in touch with our bodies, not very in touch with the world around us, nature. that it could be so helpful. And now I'm actually really curious to know if there is a place where we can read more about it, or maybe we can follow you somewhere to learn more about it, because it opens so many doors for so many different conversations that I hope we might hold at one point. But if someone would like to learn more about what you've just discussed, where can they follow you? What can they read on?
Thank you for asking. I have a website. It's betheradicalway.com. You can also email me at betheradicalway@gmail.com. That will be a good entry point. That'll put you in contact with me. You'll be able to read a little bit of my work. Obviously, you mentioned earlier, I'm the podcast host for Mudwater's Trends with Benefits. I have a whole series of microdose episodes that talk about a lot of these concepts, and they're just short little episodes, 10 to 15 minute long episodes. It's all free, so you can absolutely go and listen to those. I also have the macrodose episodes with guests such as yourself, where we get into all kinds of topics around well-being and health. And then if people want to read something, my mentors actually wrote a book. It's called Access to Power. Julia Kelleher is the main author on that book, but there are multiple authors, including Nancy Shantou and Paula Elliott. You can find Access to Power online. So it's our handbook if people want more information on what Skills for Change is. But in the meantime, if you want free content, I'd highly recommend checking out that Mudwater podcast.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sara. It was an absolute pleasure, and I've learned so much, and I think that all our listeners will be so grateful for your contribution and just being there, in such a comforting presence with our feeling uncomfortable, unsure, even anxious, and maybe even sometimes with grief about what's happening in the world today. So thank you so much, and I hope we can talk again soon.
I can't wait until the next time we talk.
Thank you.